porch light was still on when the school bus came the next morning. On the morning of Thursday, October 18th, 1984, in the farming township of Millhaven, Michigan, population 4,012, the Route 7 school bus made its usual stop at the end of Sycamore Road at 7:45, waited the standard 45 seconds, and drove on. The Voss children weren't there. They were always there. The bus driver, a man named Earl Purdy, who had been running that route for 11 years, noted it in his log as unusual, but not alarming. Sometimes families ran late. Sometimes there was a dentist appointment. Sometimes things came up. He did not know that inside the farmhouse at the end of that gravel drive, the breakfast was still on the stove. Donna and Carl Voss had 2 children, Bethany, who was 9, and Marcus, who was 7. They had a dog named Pepper who slept on the back porch. They had a Dodge pickup that was still in the barn. They had a television set in the living room where the Atari was plugged in and a half-finished game of Centipede was frozen on the screen. None of them were there. 4 of them were gone, and it would take 40 years. A retired detective who kept a shoebox of photographs in his bedroom closet and a genealogy database that didn't exist until the 21st century to finally name the man who took them. But to understand what was lost, you first have to understand who the Voss family was. Because in Millhaven, Michigan, in the autumn of 1984, they weren't just a family. They were the kind of family a whole town measures itself by. Millhaven sits in the thumb of Michigan, in the flat farmland north of Flint, where the winters come in from Lake Huron and settle hard and the summers are brief and golden, and everybody makes the most of them. In 1984, it was the kind of town where the grain elevator was the tallest building, and the 4th of July parade took 20 minutes to walk its full length, and the high school football team was the thing the whole county showed up for. The corn was still standing in the fields that October, dry and rattling in the early cold, and the smell of it, dusty and sweet and faintly of something ending, was the smell of every Millhaven autumn for as long as anyone could remember. Carl Voss was 34 years old. He had grown up on the family farm, inherited it at 26 when his father's health gave out, and had spent the better part of a decade making it work through lean years and leaner ones with the kind of quiet determination that doesn't call attention to itself. He was a man who fixed things, equipment, fences, neighbors' problems if they asked him. He served 2 terms on the township planning board. He coached his son's Little League team in the summers, an unpracticed and enthusiastic coach who was remembered by the other parents less for any tactical wisdom and more for the way he looked at Marcus when the boy connected with a pitch, like he was watching something miraculous happen. Donna Voss was 32 years old, a registered nurse who worked 3 days a week at the Millhaven Community Clinic and spent the other 4 being the thing the clinic couldn't make her. She was the person her neighbors called when they didn't know what else to do. She had a practical, unhurried warmth that people in town described as the kind that didn't need to announce itself. She kept a handwritten recipe box on the kitchen counter. Her mother's recipes, her grandmother's, a few of her own, and the box was the kind of object that tells you everything about a person without saying a word. Bethany was 9, and already serious in the way some 9-year-olds are, the ones who have decided the world is interesting and want to understand all of it. She was in 4th grade and had recently discovered the school library's section on astronomy. She had a notebook where she copied down facts about planets. Marcus was 7, and her opposite, loud, physical, always muddy. The kind of child who came home with grass stains in places that defied explanation. He had named the dog Pepper himself, because it was the first word he read entirely on his own. On the evening of Wednesday, October 17th, 1984, The Voss family had done what they did on most Wednesday evenings. Carl had come in from the fields at 6. Donna had made pot roast. Bethany had done her homework at the kitchen table, while Marcus watched television. At 8:15, Donna had called her mother in Bay City to check in about Thanksgiving plans. The call lasted 11 minutes. At 9 o'clock, Carl had locked the front door and turned off the living room lights. He had left the porch light on, as he always did, so Donna could see the step when she came in from the clinic on her late nights. The porch light was still burning the next morning at 7:45. That was the last ordinary evening that family ever had, and none of them knew it. It was a neighbor who raised the alarm. Bob Schaefer farmed the property that bordered the Voss land to the east and had done business with Carl for 8 years. At 9:30 on Thursday morning, Schaefer drove the access road along the field boundary to return a posthole digger he'd borrowed the previous week. He saw the pickup still in the barn. He saw Pepper on the back porch, which was unusual. Carl always let the dog in before he started work. He knocked on the back door. No answer. He tried the handle. It wasn't locked. Inside, the farmhouse was orderly. The pot roast pan was soaking in the sink. The homework was still on the kitchen table. The Atari screen in the living room showed the frozen game. The beds had been slept in, Bethany's neatly, Marcus's as if the sheets had been through a storm, but both children were gone. There was no sign of violence. There was no note. There was no indication that any member of the Voss family had planned to go anywhere. Schaefer called the sheriff's department from the farmhouse telephone at 9:47. The first patrol car arrived at 10:12. By noon, the Allegan County Sheriff's Office had 4 deputies at the property. By 2 o'clock, Detective Sergeant Raymond Ellery had taken command of the scene. Ellery was 46 years old, a former Army MP who had been with the county sheriff for 14 years and had worked missing persons cases before. Though never one like this, he was methodical and careful, and deeply uneasy from the first hour. 4 people missing from a locked-down rural property with no vehicle gone, no money withdrawn, no calls made. The absence of obvious explanation was itself a kind of evidence, and it told him something he didn't want it to say. The search mobilized fast. By Friday, volunteers numbered more than 600, farmers, mill workers, the high school football team, families who had never spoken to the Vosses and came anyway. They searched the fields, the woodlots, the drainage ditches, the creek beds. Divers went into Millhaven Lake. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the farmland. State police joined the effort on the second day. The FBI was notified by the end of the first week. The evidence gathered in those early days was thin and frustrating. A single tire track in the soft ground of the barn approach, inconsistent with the Voss pickup, was cast and photographed, but never matched. 2 feedbares recovered from the back porch railing were sent to the state lab. Results came back inconclusive. A farmhand who had worked for Carl on a seasonal basis during harvest was interviewed twice and cleared. His whereabouts on the night of the 17th were accounted for by 4 separate witnesses. The one detail that Ellery returned to, again and again, was the porch light. Carl Voss left that light on every night for Donna's late clinic shifts. It was a habit, a small domestic ritual the neighbors knew about, and the clinic staff confirmed. But Donna had not worked the night of October 17th. She had been home all evening. There was no reason for the light. Unless Carl had left it on for someone else, someone he was expecting, or someone he was trying not to think about while he locked the door and went to bed. Ellery could never prove it, but the porch light was the detail that stayed with him. By spring of 1985, 6 months in, The official investigation had stalled. The Voss family had been found nowhere. No remains, no confirmed sighting, no physical evidence of what had become of them. The case remained open but effectively frozen, classified as a critical missing persons inquiry with no active leads. In Millhaven, the silence where answers should have been was its own wound. At the First Methodist Church, a service was held in November. The pew where the Voss family had sat every Sunday morning was left empty for a year. Nobody said anything about it. Nobody had to. By 1990, 6 years had passed. The Voss farm had been held in trust by Carl's brother Dale, who drove out from Grand Rapids every few months to check on the property and couldn't bring himself to change anything inside the house. The recipe box was still on the kitchen counter. Bethany's Planet notebook was still in her bedroom. Marcus's baseball glove was still on the back porch, next to the hook where Pepper's lead had hung. Raymond Ellery retired from the Allegan County Sheriff's Office in 1993 after 21 years of service. He took the Voss case files home in a shoebox. He didn't talk about it much, but his wife of 38 years, a woman named Helen, would later say that she could always tell when he'd been reading through it again, because he'd go quiet in a way that was different from his regular quiet. He kept a photograph, the Voss family Christmas card from 1983, which had been mailed to Sheriff's Department contacts as part of the original public appeal. In the top drawer of the bedroom dresser. By 1997, 13 years gone, Donna's mother had died without knowing what had happened to her daughter. Carl's brother Dale had developed a heart condition. The Voss Farms fields had been leased to a neighboring operation, and the farmhouse sat locked and unchanged, a monument to an absence that had never been explained. The reward, first posted at $10,000 by a community fund in 1985, later raised to $50,000 with the involvement of a National Missing Persons Foundation, remained unclaimed. In 2001, the Michigan State Police Cold Case Unit took over primary jurisdiction of the file. A review was conducted. Investigators returned to Millhaven, re-interviewed anyone still reachable, and submitted the original physical evidence for updated forensic analysis. The fiber samples had degraded. The tire cast yielded nothing new. The review concluded without a breakthrough. In the Millhaven Community Clinic waiting room, Donna Voss's name was still on the Employee Recognition Board from 1984. The clinic administrator had never asked anyone to take it down. She said she was waiting until there was a reason to. The case had been cold for 24 years when everything changed. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together lives that were lost too soon. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, please take a second to like this video and subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the Voss family. In 2008, the Allegan County Prosecutor's Office received a letter. It had been written by a man named Dennis Holter, who was at the time serving a 12-year sentence at a federal correctional facility in Ohio for a series of armed robberies committed between 2001 and 2004. Holter was 51 years old. The letter stated that he had information relevant to the 1984 disappearance of the Voss family in Millhaven, Michigan. It stated that he had not been directly involved. It stated that he had driven a vehicle. The letter was 2 paragraphs long. It was signed and dated. Investigators from the Michigan State Police Cold Case Unit traveled to Ohio within 3 weeks. Holter spoke to them for 9 hours across 2 days. What he described, partially and with the careful omissions of a man whose lawyer was present throughout, established for the first time a chain of events on the night of October 17th, 1984, that investigators had never previously had access to. He named a man. The name was Gerald Marsh. Gerald Marsh was 67 years old in 2008, and living in Saginaw, Michigan. He had retired 2 years earlier from a long career as an insurance assessor, and was, by all visible indicators, entirely unremarkable. He attended St. Francis of Assisi Parish. He volunteered at the Saginaw Food Bank on alternate Saturdays. He had a daughter in Lansing, and a son in Chicago, and 3 grandchildren whose photographs he kept in his wallet. He had also, in 1984, lived in Millhaven. He had worked for the County Agricultural Extension Office. He had known Carl Voss by name, and by sight, they had attended several of the same Township Planning Board meetings. There was, according to records recovered later, a dispute in the summer of 1984 involving a field drainage issue on which Marsh had ruled against the Voss property's interests. Carl had filed a formal objection. The objection was documented. The bad feeling between the two men was, in the words of one planning board member interviewed in 2008, not hidden. Holter's account could not stand alone. It was partial, self-serving, and provided by a man with legal reasons to cooperate. Prosecutors knew it. Investigators knew it. What they needed was physical evidence that could place Marsh at the Voss property on the night of October 17th. That evidence had been sitting in a state forensics storage facility in Lansing since 1984. Among the original physical evidence collected from the Voss farmhouse and its surrounds was a set of items recovered from the barn and the barn approach, including, logged on page 7 of the original evidence manifest, a partial cigarette found in the dirt near the barn's side entrance. The cigarette had been collected, bagged, and sent to the state lab in 1984. The lab had found no usable fingerprints, and the technology to extract DNA from such a sample did not exist. It had remained in sealed storage for 24 years. Forensic genomic sequencing, the process of recovering a DNA profile from degraded biological material through advanced extraction techniques, had advanced significantly by the late 2000s. The cold case unit submitted the cigarette for full DNA extraction in early 2009. The profile came back. It was complete. On a Tuesday afternoon in March 2009, Detective Corporal Susan Reeves was at her desk at the Michigan State Police Cold Case Unit when the genomics report landed in her email. She printed it. She cross-referenced the profile against the state and federal DNA databases. There was no direct match. Gerald Marsh's DNA was not in either system. But the familial matching algorithm flagged a close biological relative who was registered, Marsh's son, who had submitted a voluntary DNA sample as part of a workplace security clearance in 2003. Reeves sat with it for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Raymond Ellery. He answered on the second ring. He was 71 years old and had been retired for 16 years, and he listened to what she told him without saying a word until she was finished. Then he said, "The porch light." She said, "I know." A warrant was obtained. Gerald Marsh submitted a DNA sample under compulsion on April 3, 2009. The results were returned in 11 days. It was a match. The arrest of Gerald Marsh took place on the morning of April 22, 2009, at his home on Creekside Drive in Saginaw. He came to the door in a cardigan. 2 Michigan State Police detectives and a county prosecutor's investigator were waiting on his front step. When the lead detective told him the reason for their visit, Marsh looked at them for a moment with an expression that witnesses would later describe as neither surprise nor guilt, but something more unsettling than either. A kind of tired recognition, as if he had always known the morning would eventually arrive. He said, "I'd like to call my children." He was permitted to call his daughter. Then he was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police vehicle. The neighbors on Creekside Drive watched from their driveways. Several of them had known Gerald Marsh for years. One woman, who had relied on him to drive her to church every second Sunday after her hip replacement, stood in her driveway in her housecoat in the April cold and did not go back inside for a very long time. At St. Francis of Assisi Parish, where Marsh had served as a reader at the Saturday evening Mass, the priest released a statement saying the community was devastated and praying for all those affected. The food bank coordinator, who had worked alongside Marsh every other Saturday for 9 years, said she felt as though the ground had shifted under her, and she didn't know where to put her feet. "You think you know people," she said. "You think knowing someone for 9 years means something." Dennis Holter's testimony, combined with the Dina evidence, the documented dispute between Marsh and Carl Voss, and additional forensic evidence recovered during the search of Marsh's Saginaw property, including items that had belonged to members of the Voss family, formed the evidentiary foundation of the prosecution. The remains of the Voss family were located in 2010 during excavation of a property Marsh had owned in 1984 and sold in 1989, situated 12 miles south of Millhaven. Carl and Donna Voss were brought home. Bethany and Marcus Voss were brought home. They were buried together in Millhaven Cemetery, in a service attended by more people than the town had gathered in one place since 1984. Gerald Marsh was tried in the Allegan County Circuit Court in 2011. He did not testify. He did not confess. He offered no statement. His attorney argued the evidence was circumstantial. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned 4 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He was 70 years old. In the courtroom, Dale Voss, Carl's brother, who had driven to that empty farmhouse every few months for 25 years, sat in the front row of the public gallery and held a photograph of the family's 1983 Christmas card, the one Raymond Ellery had kept in the top drawer of his bedroom dresser. Dale had one from the same batch. Raymond Ellery attended the sentencing. He was 72 years old, a little stooped, with the look of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had only just been allowed to set it down. He didn't speak to the press. He stood outside the courthouse in the Allegan spring light for a while, and then he got in his car and drove home to his wife Helen, and she said he didn't go quiet that evening in the way she'd grown accustomed to. He was just quiet in the normal way. The ordinary, peaceful, end-of-a-day quiet. The Voss farmhouse in Millhaven still stands. Dale sold it in 2013, finally, to a young family from Flint who were looking for land. They didn't know the history when they bought it. They found out gradually, from neighbors, from the town. They chose to stay. On the kitchen counter, they found the recipe box, Donna Voss's handwritten collection, her mother's recipes and her grandmother's and a few of her own. And they called Dale before throwing it away. And Dale came and collected it, and he said he was glad someone had thought to ask. Bethany Voss had been going to be an astronomer. Marcus had been learning to read. Carl had been saving coins in a jar on his workshop shelf for a trip to the lake he and Donna had been planning for 3 years. Donna's recipe box sits now in Dale Voss's house in Grand Rapids, in a kitchen where it is occasionally opened, and the handwriting inside is still clear and steady. The way handwriting is when someone writes believing they have all the time in the world. Justice is not always legible while it's being delayed. 25 years of closed doors and cold trails, and a shoebox of photographs on a bedroom dresser can look, from the outside, like failure. But what the Voss case shows us is that evidence preserved honestly and case files kept faithfully, and one detective who couldn't let go of a porch light. All of it accumulates, across decades, into something the truth can finally use. A partial cigarette. 24 years in a bag. A match. That was enough. Before you go, there are a few questions worth sitting with. Do you think a life sentence without parole was just for a man who never confessed and allowed a family's remains to go unfound for 26 years? Or does justice require something more? What does it say about the nature of guilt that Gerald Marsh spent 25 years attending church and volunteering at a food bank, while a family he had destroyed lay 12 miles away? And how many other cases from this era still have evidence sitting in storage that the technology of today could finally speak to? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. Justice found Carl, Donna, Bethany, and Marcus Voss after 25 years. Stories like theirs are why this channel exists. If you believe that truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you're here when the next case comes. More are waiting in the description below. Thank you for watching.